told.
Hi, Mayor.
Hi there.
We have a special guest tonight. Wilson is attending.
Oh, very good. Hey, Wilson. Oh, so sweet.
Hi, Mayor.
Hey, how are you? Good to see you.
Wilson raised his hand.
All right.
That was
Time
really
to go.
cute last night when Leandra's little girl raised her hand.
Raised his hand. Oh,
I
you got
have something to say.
Like,
She did. It was really cute.
Oh. That is cute.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Wow, we got all council all ready to go. Let's see here.
Because we started at 4:30.
Mm-hmm. It's great. I've got 501. Let's see here.
Oh.
Let's see. Okay. And I don't see any staff. Actually,
There's
One second.
Brian.
I'm here, Mayor.
great. One second. Okay. Well, just a couple minutes after 5. Let's go ahead and get started. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
Allegiance.
to the flag
of the United
The
States
flag.
United States of America,
The
and to
United
the
States
republic
to the
To the
republic
republic
for which it
for which
stands,
it
which
stands,
stands
one nation,
one
One
nation,
nation,
God,
under
indivisible,
God,
God.
with
indivisible,
liberty and
with
justice
liberty
for
and
all.
justice
liberty
for all.
and justice for all.
Ooh.
Okay. Well, welcome. We've got a study session for the Housing Action Plan. I know the council's already had a meeting already. So we've got a busy evening this evening. We've got the study session. We'll have a staff report from Brian Davis, our Community Development Director. Then we'll have a consultant presentation and then council questions and discussions. Then we'll follow that with public comment. And then after that, we'll have an executive session. So we should probably give ourselves, is Ryan on the line?
Yes, Mayor.
Ryan, how long will we need for the Housing Action Plan? Excuse me, for
scheduled
the
10 minutes.
I mean, for the executive session. 10 minutes?
We scheduled 10 minutes.
Okay, so I think that we should maybe about an hour from now, maybe 10 after. We should make sure that that we wrap up the study session, so we can do our executive session. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to Brian Davis.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Farrell, Council President Honda, and members of the council. Happy to be with you tonight and to have this study session on an issue that's been very important to the council, that being housing. What we're going to present to you tonight is a mixture of findings and then proposed objectives for your consideration. We're looking forward to getting your input on the direction of this project to make sure it's in line with what you would like us to do. So for the first 2/3, it's going to be a lot of presenting of findings that we've been researching and providing to formulate the objectives, which will again be the last third roughly, and then we'll have discussion after that with the council. So we're going to have 2 initial presentations. The first by Cheney Skatson, who's an associate planner with the city. She's the project manager for this effort, and she will be followed by Kevin Ramsey, who is our consultant working on this from Burke Consulting. So I'll turn it over to Cheney. Thank you.
Can I be disabled to share my screen, please?
Yep, stand by. Try again, please.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor, Council President, and members of the Council. I'm Janie Skatson, Associate Planner and the Housing Action Plan Project Manager for the city. The goal of this meeting, like Brian said, is for the Housing Action Planning team, the city staff and the hired consultants to gather direction from the City Council on the housing objectives and potential strategies for the Housing Action Plan. To best accomplish this goal, staff will do an introduction and review some sub-regional key findings, and then pass over the presentation to Burke Consulting, Kevin Ramsey, the project manager. In 2019, the City of Federal Way received $100,000 from the Washington State Department of Commerce to prepare a housing action plan. Part of that money went to participating in a sub-regional framework. The goal of the Housing Action Plan, as stated in RCW, is to encourage the construction of additional affordable and market rate housing in a greater variety of housing types and at prices that are accessible to a greater variety of incomes, including strategies aimed for the for-profit single-family home market. The city's Housing Action Plan document will lay out a comprehensive housing policy direction for which regulatory changes can be implemented. The intent of this plan is that the regulatory changes occurring after adoption be towards the goal of increasing residential building capacity in the city. The Federal Way area began developing in the late 1800s as a logging settlement. By the 1920s, Highway 99 was complete, linking the economic centers of Seattle and Tacoma. By the mid-1980s, South King County was growing rapidly, leading to a jump in apartment complex development. Desiring controlled and quality growth, the community identified citizens and community identity, citizens and organized to form what was then Washington's sixth largest city, incorporating in February 1990. Throughout the decades, increasing fine-tuned zoning and land use regulations were adopted and amended. Today, there are over a dozen comprehensive plan designations and zoning designations classified by minimum lot size, density, and use, devoted to single-family residential, multifamily residential, and mixed use, respectively. Currently, single-family zones make up nearly 70% of the city's zoned area. High-density single-family zones that allow a considerable amount of the missing middle housing typology only makes up 1.1% of the city's zone area. Multifamily zones make up a little over 11%, and they allow maximum densities between 12 to 24 dwelling units per acre. As a result, Federal Way has a largely built-out single-family neighborhoods and high-density apartments, lacking a diversity in housing types and choice attainable to individuals and households and families. Federal Way is an attractive place to live in a booming region. And like most cities in Washington state, it's getting harder to find decent housing at a reasonable price. To dive deeper, Federal Way participated in the development of a sub-regional housing action plan framework with 5 other cities facing similar pressures of being within close proximity of the large metro area of Seattle and Bellevue. The framework serves to inform the development of the housing action plan. Listed in front of you here is a list of goals and deliverables we received, particularly gathering and compiling data at the sub-regional level for policy development at the city level. The region is growing. By 2040, the region is expected to reach over 630,000 people. And Federal Way will reach over 106,000 people. Development has not kept up with growth. In the time frame between 2011 and 2019, the sub-region produced only 7.5 new housing units for every 10 new households, whereas Federal Way produced 5.3 housing units for every 10 new households that formed in the city, with which is nearly 1 household being produced for every 2 new families or housing needed. This is the lowest level of production in any city in the South King County subregion. The imbalance resulting from lagging residential production in a growing region makes finding housing more difficult, and displacement is already occurring. Without any measures to increase housing production that meets the community needs, housing will continue to be competitive, making it increasingly difficult for Federal Way's existing community to afford to remain to live here, especially for young adults starting out and seniors looking to downsize. The Housing Action Plan provides a strategy or strategic roadmap for actions the city can take to encourage more housing production, greater housing diversity, and attainable housing choices for residents of all income levels. So far, the Federal Way's Housing Action Plan has done a lot of work, and this includes a housing needs assessment, community and stakeholder engagement, housing policy review, and a code audit. Some more components that will be part of the Federal Way's Housing Action Plan include the housing objectives and strategies that we'll be talking tonight, and then a schedule of next steps towards implementation. That is it for my presentation. I will let Kevin take it away to discuss further.
Thanks, Cheney. I'll try to, can I share my screen, please? Let's see if this works. Okay, here it's working now. All right, you see my screen? Thank you everyone for having me today. My name is Kevin Ramsey. I'm an associate principal at Burke Consulting, and I've been working with Cheney and Brian on this project.
Kevin, your screen isn't shared yet.
It's not shared. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll try again. It lit up for me, but maybe I didn't push all the right buttons.
There we go. Now it's starting. Perfect.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we've been supporting this since last spring or summer. And I'm excited to provide an update to you all on our progress. As many of you know, my colleague Erica invited each of the city council members at the time to some interviews at the very onset of this project to get a better understanding of your perspectives and concerns and priorities to help inform how we design and shape this project and the types of issues that we dig into in more depth. So that's really informed how we've approached this. And I think I'm looking forward to this opportunity to providing an update and getting some additional feedback from you all to help shape the kind of final stretch of this work. So sorry, So this is showing the grant requirements. So as Cheney was saying, the city received a grant from the Washington State Department of Commerce. There are 6 major elements, requirements in the project. I won't go into these in much detail. They were in the memo. But key parts were, housing needs assessment, as Cheney mentioned before, developing strategies that increase the supply of housing and the variety of housing types necessary to serving the housing needs identified in the needs assessment. Strategies looking at displacement of low-income households is one example. Community engagement, which we'll talk about in a bit, review of plans and policies, as well as kind of a schedule of programs and actions to implement the recommendations. And this needs to be compiled in a report that's adopted by City Council before the end of June 2021 in order to receive the full funding from Commerce for this grant. So I got to go through some key findings here. And Cheney already did a great job of providing an overview of some of this, so I'll go pretty quick. One thing we look at is cost burden. Cost burden is measured by households that are spending more than 30% of their income on their housing costs. That's a standard measure that's used to identify households that likely have limited funds available for other life necessities, for education, for food, for clothing, for transportation, et cetera. So about 40% of the population's cost burdened. Greatest needs are with households with incomes below 50% of area median income. And I'll provide a little bit more detail on income levels in a second. We also found that this cost burden is disproportionately impacting communities of color in Federal Way. New housing production is not keeping pace with demand. Cheney went into this in good detail. What they found was the city needs to add 6,800 new units before 2040. This is equivalent of 339 new units per year, which is a pretty significant increase from recent trends. And I have that chart there of unit production by year, particularly with the exception of the spike in 2016 and 2017. The trend in Federal Way has been significantly below what's needed to kind of to not only hit that growth target, but really have production that's keeping pace with demand in a way that can help moderate housing cost escalation. And a key finding, as Cheney pointed out, was that the city really needs a diversity of new housing types. It's not going to be able to meet needs by just focusing on single family or just on large apartment buildings. It's going to take a diversity of different types, including missing middle types, as Cheney was talking about, that can come in at a variety of price points for a variety of income levels. This chart just gets into the concept of area median income. For those of you that this is new, but housing professionals use group households by income level when talking about housing affordability and identifying housing needs by affordability level. In the King County, in the metro area, the area median income is $113,000. So that's significantly higher than the median income in Federal Way, but everything is done based on the regional area that Federal Way is located in. And then when determining households by income level, it adjusts by size. And that's what these, the income thresholds down here in the bottom part of the screen are indicating. And this just shows a number of different kind of example occupations in the area, and it just by income level, just to relate these. Some big ones in Federal Way would be like a teacher, which is here somewhere between 50 and 80% of AMI. Healthcare aides, often much lower pay. Personal care aides, around $30,000, definitely in the lowest income group. So we're talking about different working people, working families in these different income ranges, and this just kind of helps drive it home a little bit. So I brought that up because one of the things that the assessment came up with was projecting out what are the different number of units needed in the future by affordability level. So this again looks at those different levels compared to area median income or AMI, and it's showing that it's going to take a diversity of different housing strategies to kind of get at housing needs at these different income levels, which are spread out across the whole spectrum here. We also did an audit of the housing policies in the comprehensive plan, as well as development regulations and code to identify impacts. So one good thing was that the compan review showed that your current goals and policies in the comprehensive plan are supportive and encouraging of more housing production and diversity of formats to meet housing needs. So all generally consistent with the goals of this housing action plan and the needs that Federal Way is facing right now. So that was a reassuring finding. It also found that the new housing production in Federal Way, the two biggest limits are code provisions that present regulatory barriers, and we'll talk about a couple of those, and then disproportionate impact fees compared to other jurisdictions, particularly impacting multifamily production. The highest impact opportunities for code changes, we're looking at parking standards. There are suggestions for form-based code approaches in place of strict lot sizes and density requirements, basically more flexibility to allow for different types of units, and just removing some barriers that kind of get in the way of units that are allowed but are just difficult to produce in Federal Way right now. And looking at ground floor commercial requirements in areas that aren't on kind of core commercial streets where you'd really want to encourage that. When they're imposed in other areas that aren't kind of core commercial thoroughfares, it can present a real barrier to multifamily development. I'm going to switch gears and talk about engagement here. We've done a number of activities to date to engage stakeholders and the general public. Of course, this effort's been significantly limited by COVID, and that's been a real disappointment compared to, I think, what the original hope was, to really have really be out in the community engaging with folks directly around these types of important questions. And of course, that's not as possible now. But we changed our approach early on and have come up with some good ways to engage folks, and we have some more planned coming up. So there's a website, there's a newsletter for project updates that the city maintains. We formed a stakeholder advisory group with 10 different members that are representative of a variety of different aspects, from developers, from market rate developers to affordable housers to service providers to the business community, education, community groups. So it's a really good representative group of folks and provide some thoughtful input over 4 meetings. We had interviews with additional stakeholders. There was a visual preference survey, which you got a sample of in the packet for this meeting. And that went out to the general public. And there's been presentations to the Planning Commission and the Land Use and Transportation Committee. Moving forward, we're starting to formulate a new survey to really try to engage the public and stakeholders more broadly in looking at potential housing strategies and hearing their priorities and what they think would be most effective in the area. Once we've received feedback from council and others, try to narrow down this list. Public hearing at a planning commission meeting, and then several more public presentations of this material as it's in draft form up to the city council meeting in June, where you guys can consider this for acceptance. I'm gonna skip not going into detail here, and just jump. One key point on the visual preference survey is it was very representative of different parts of Federal Way, particularly homeowners and single-family homeowners was about 86% of the takers of the survey. So it really represents not only the renters but also the homeowners within the city. And one finding was that there's a strong majority of support for several different images that were presented. One thing was presented was different types of new housing formats for new housing that could be considered within existing single-family zones. We asked for, which of these do you think would fit in and would you support? And there was strong majority support for corner duplexes and duplexes with varied designs. The images there on the screen. In multifamily zones, townhomes were popular and got strong majority support, from both owners and renters, as well as mixed-use developments in commercial and downtown zones. So it was really good to see. While there are some designs that definitely did not receive support, when presented with the right types of designs, the majority of community members that were surveyed were very supportive of new types of housing and encouraging new types of housing in Federal Way. So now I'm going to switch gears. We've been talking about findings of the work we've done to date, and now we're really looking for your input on some key kind of policy inputs to this process to help inform what should be included in the Housing Action Plan to address the needs that we've identified. To get the conversation started, we've drafted a series of proposed housing objectives. So these are basically objectives that the city could aim to achieve through the actions in the Housing Action Plan, and in a way to kind of really focus on what are we trying to achieve, and then once we agree on what we're trying to achieve, then what are the best, most effective, and most appropriate strategies to get there. So really getting your feedback on these objectives will be helpful. I've got them up on the screen here. But I've also got some slides one for each of them to kind of talk about where these came from, how they relate to the needs that we've identified to date, and just the general types of strategies that could be considered for each of these objectives. But really looking for feedback on, are these objectives the right ones? Are we missing anything? Are we stating this in the most effective way for your community? That sort of feedback. And please, as I go through these, feel free to jump in with questions. I can't see all of you right now, so you have to shout to let me know. But I'm happy to pause and answer any questions as we go through these, because this is really where we want to facilitate a conversation. I'm going to start with the first one, encouraging new development to expand housing choices. This one, of course, is really consistent with the goals of the Housing Action Plan and the grant from Commerce that Federal Way received. As we've already noted, increasing the general housing supply to address housing shortages is a real crucial overarching need that we found in this work, as well as the need for a greater diversity to expand housing choices, both renter and ownership, for all income levels. So here, the biggest strategies to consider would be related to the regulatory barriers that we talked about earlier from the code audit findings, and ways to make it easier for developers and more feasible for developers to provide a greater variety of housing types within existing areas of the community. And also reducing financial barriers to development. Impact fees is one that comes up quite a bit, particularly for multifamily. But there's other ways to address financial barriers as well, such as incentives. Federal Way has a multifamily tax exemption, which with some affordability requirements, but they're set rather high right now. There's lots of room to explore. Could the MFT be expanded to more areas to incentivize and bring down the cost of providing new housing in other areas of the city? And could the affordability requirements be adjusted to really make sure that the city is getting a real benefit for that tax exemption in the form of affordable units that wouldn't otherwise be provided by the market? There's a lot of opportunity there for exploration. And of course, transit-oriented development with the two new stations being added in Federal Way. There's tremendous opportunities here to take advantage of in siting more housing in those areas that are going to have good access to transit and the amenities that come with that. Moving on to the second objective is supporting equity and homeownership opportunities. This again, addresses the need for more housing supply, but specifically on the ownership side. In a lot of communities, there's a good supply of single-family homes, which are often out of reach, particularly as housing prices have been increasing as quickly as they have. They've really put a lot of single-family homes out of reach of middle and moderate income households that are trying to break in, to the housing market. So providing more pathways to kind of attainable home ownership for these households is the goal here. And reducing barriers to homeownership experienced by BIPOC households, so Black, Indigenous, people of color. One of the findings is that there obviously there's disparities in terms of homeownership compared to white households in Federal Way. And there's a number of barriers that are experienced, not just income, but also education, access to financing. There's a lot of different room for programs and to address those. So some of the strategies that could be considered there are along those lines, as well as reducing regulatory barriers. Again, in terms of looking at code that can make it easier to develop things like townhomes, smaller cottage homes, or condominiums as another ownership housing option. There are real barriers to developing these types of housing right now in Federal Way. The third objective is enhancing the character and livability of existing neighborhoods. So this is really looking to see how, if and when Federal Way encourages more housing production to occur, and that's occurring within existing kind of developed areas of the city, how can we ensure that they're woven into the existing fabric to promote community cohesion and integration and vitality? You know, a lot of the visual preference survey got at this issue, you know, asking residents to comment on, you know, what they think would fit in if we do introduce new types of housing, what would fit in best to existing communities. So this, you know, these would look at strategies. A lot of them are regulatory again, that ensure that new kinds of allowable housing include design standards that promote compatibility with existing communities and enhance the built environment. The next objective here is promoting complete communities by tying new housing production to improved infrastructure, resources, and amenities. Here, the needs are about making sure that when the city encourages more new development to occur, that it's occurring in places that have access to infrastructure, to services and amenities that enable these new residents to thrive and have opportunity. And when there are, you know, gaps in the availability of those services, or the new growth kind of exceeds the capacity of them, to really make sure that new growth is paired with investments to ensure that the services and infrastructure that's needed is provided. So this could, you know, occur, you know, TOD is a great example of how to do this, you know, by focusing in areas with frequent transit that really helps meet the transportation needs of new residents, looking at parks and open space, looking at neighborhood serving businesses, schools, social services, really doing the additional planning work to make sure that where new growth is occurring, we're also planning for the other needs of those people. So, you know, strategies would be looking to align those through planning, through going after funding for new investments to ensure livability for both new and existing residents. The last objective, before I'll pause and let you all talk, is helping residents to stay in their homes. This is really about acknowledging that housing prices are increasing quickly. This is, causing, in some cases, people to be pushed out based on economic pressures or based on eviction. And one of the themes that our thing was looking at eviction and particularly the disproportionate impacts of eviction on communities of color, particularly Black community in Federal Way. And the strategies here, they're kind of two-form. That could be supporting the preservation of existing affordable housing that isn't subsidized. It's market rate housing that just happens to be older and more affordable. Sometimes that could be torn down and replaced with higher cost housing, or just as costs go up, the existing residents can be priced out. So working either as a community or with the subregion to look at options there, or strategies to reduce displacement pressures experienced by existing residents. So I'll pause and ask if there's any questions based on what we heard.
Council, any questions?
I have some questions.
Go ahead, Council President Honda.
Thank you. So thank you for your presentation.
Welcome.
So you said you start off with 40% of the population is cost burdened in Federal Way. How does this compare to other South Sound cities, South King County cities?
I don't have that in front of me, but my experience working with a lot of communities in the area is it's similar, and cost burden is a pretty widespread problem.
Okay.
I don't believe we identified a particular concentration in Federal Way, for example.
Okay, so we don't stand out in that respect. We're not that different than the cities surrounding us.
I think that's safe to say.
Okay. you talked about single-family homes and perhaps that they could be replaced, torn down and rebuilt. Are you talking about rebuilding single-family homes in existing neighborhoods of multifamily developments? Has that come up?
We haven't been proposing any strategies like that. What was considered in the in the visual preference survey was asking where there is room for for infill development, or in cases where where older single family housing is replaced, what would be acceptable types of new housing that could be integrated there, to get community feedback on that. There's been nothing. Obviously, we haven't proposed any strategies specifically yet, but that's a common strategy that a lot of communities are considering. With so much of the land area zoned exclusively for single family, your opportunities for getting missing middle housing within remaining zones are fairly limited, and some communities have found that some of these duplexes or accessory dwelling units or other ways to gently allow for housing that is compatible with the existing built environment within those neighborhoods is an effective way to bring in additional supply, allow more opportunity for people to live in those communities without impacting the overall form and feel of those places. Does that help?
It does help. I have two more questions, if that's okay, Mayor.
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you. The advisory group, I have looked at the names on the advisory group, and did we have any developers or builders in that group that could offer advice to the city as to what it would take to build more housing in Federal Way?
Yes, there were both market rate as well as affordable housing developers that did provide that sort of input on the process.
Okay, thank you. And transit, you mentioned transit, and the Federal Way for a long time, including currently, has tried to get more transit into our neighborhoods. It's very difficult even now to be able to use buses into Seattle or Tacoma because it's hard to get from your neighborhood, your housing area, to downtown to where the transit center is. And as we build light rail and light rail comes on board, hopefully we will have more transit going into our neighborhoods, even as far off as Browns Point and Dash Point, and bringing people to the transit center so that we have less cars on the road. We won't have enough parking. We know that. We will never have enough parking for the people that want to use transit. So we need to get them there by alternative means. And we do need more transit. That is something that we've known for a long time. And we've worked with Metro and Sound Transit with that. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, council, any other questions? Since the screen is being shared, I can't see.
I can stop sharing.
So
I see.
have a question.
Okay, Councilmember Kochmar.
May I have raised my hand? Oh, okay.
Oh, there we go. So we'll get that after Councilmember Kochmar. We'll say, there you are. We'll say Councilmember Sepidawson and then Councilmember Baruso. All right.
Thank
now
you.
I see your hands.
Thank you, Mayor. Kevin, I guess it's your townhouses and your duplexes are very attractive, but I think what would be helpful for me to have seen a map that showed how many open space lots we have within the city of Federal Way, because we don't really have a lot of land currently for infill. We have, what we could do is have accessory dwelling units that are detached as infill that could be a duplex on some lots. But so, and we do have a cottage housing on the books. However, I don't believe we've identified areas where the cottage housing could go. I think there was one at Steel Lake that didn't develop in the past. So I guess that would be one question. The other question is, we have a lot of area east of the freeway to be annexed to our city. That would have a lot more space available for this type of housing. So those are just questions I'm just throwing out, or suggestions I'm just throwing out. I'm just trying to figure out where we could put some of these attractive duplexes within our city limits. The other thing I would question would be, if we're going to do transit-oriented development in the downtown core, rather than having apartments, how can we attract developers to build condominiums? I believe the legislature has cleared up the problem with insurance on condos. So how do we attract a developer who wants to build condos versus apartments? So, and the other thing is, I wasn't aware that we had multifamily tax exemptions still in the downtown core. So I would question that. But at any rate, I guess my thing is, where can we build these duplexes, townhouses? How much space is available? Where's the biggest bang for our buck at the moment? Because we can only do just so much. Do we concentrate on building condos instead of apartments in the downtown? Or do we concentrate on detached accessory dwelling units or townhouses as infill? Or do we talk about annexation? Just some of the things I'm throwing out. So no need to answer right now, just ideas.
I'll just note, those are great questions. I'll just note one thing. Currently, King County and Federal Way are going through an urban growth capacity study. So they're actually looking at the land supply and what is vacant, what is redevelopable, and what could you build in those areas. So that is fresh work that's being done right now. And Burke's actually supporting the King County on that as well. So there's really good data and findings from that can help inform some of your questions about, what is their capacity for under current zoning, and that if you were to consider any changes or any regulatory changes, what would, how could that affect things? I think there's good opportunities to build on, to use and build on that work to really understand the capacity issue and the kind of bang for the buck point that you brought up.
Okay, is that your last question, Councilmember Kochmar?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Cefados.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Councilmember?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Yes.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much for the presentation. And yeah, are we good?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. Sorry. I'm having issues with my system, so I can't see anyone right now. But my comments are, when you're talking about the 0 to 30% AMI, it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, we are not considering people who are being subsidized through Section 8 or public housing, correct?
Many of those people would fall into that category if they're receiving Section 8 voucher. Not all of them necessarily, but there could certainly be people in that category within that group. But it also can include working families and individuals, at lower incomes. It's a mix.
If I may just jump in.
Okay.
I just wanted to add that those regulated subsidized units are being captured in our, like when we did a housing inventory of the existing affordability levels. So that information is being captured by housing stock and size and rent price, and it is being included and considered.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And then, and look, the people, I see that the people who are cost burdened are not in that stakeholder group. So it may be too late, but I think it's important to hear from them as well and include them and hear their views. And then I do know that there's one person who represents a minority group, but then I think others are always left out. And it could be due to language, or they don't have access to the information, or they were not invited to the stakeholder advisory group, but it's just something for consideration. And then my last comment is around financial barriers, especially for home ownership, around equity and the fact that it's out of reach. And I think there are, I would love to see financial institutions get involved in this process to see how they can better support and roll out services and products that allow people who are otherwise not able to actualize home ownership. And so that could be through different financial educations or home ownership, first home buyers education, or helping them build their credit score and all these things. But I think making sure that financial institutions are invested in this process in our community would be very beneficial to they can't do that otherwise. And so those are just a few comments that I wanted to add to this, but thank you very much.
Welcome.
All right, thank you. Okay, Councilmember Russo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, Kevin. I just had a questions about on the presentation itself. You had about off-street parking. You mentioned it was a zoning, but I was kind of wondering on that aspect. Does some of the HOAs have to do with some of that with off-street parking? Number one, and how much do they dictate usually when we build new homes? So a lot of times HOAs are built off of that. So that's one question. If you want to answer that one first, and the other one I have one more after that.
Yeah, that finding in the code was not based on how homeowners associations tended. That might also be a problem, but the problem was identified by the folks doing the code audit was more just looking at the standards from the city itself, and how in some cases they were much higher in terms of the required number of parking spots than would be typical in a similar city, and that can impact the feasibility of certain types of development when you are requiring that just based on land area and whatnot. Okay,
thank you. Just a quick question on that. You talked about housing inventory. So I was just kind of wondering, folks looked in there, the group looked at the rentals and things, but how many of the rentals, if you could tell me, if you even have that information, were minority owned at all? Is there any type of information on that at all?
That's a hard one.
Probably hard to get.
Yeah, we definitely don't have that in the assessment, and it's hard. It's data that is not really readily available, unfortunately. You would need to do more kind of really on the ground research to identify that. Okay. Some communities have like a registry of rentals. I don't believe Federal Way does that, but that's one where you kind of have a centralized kind of database of who all is renting units in your community, and that's one. If you ask that question, that's one source of information for tracking that. But I don't believe Federal Way has access to that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Council President Honda.
Councilmember Kraft's hand is up, and since I've already spoken, perhaps she.
Oh, I'm sorry.
First.
Councilmember Kraft. Sorry, I didn't see.
I'll speak after she's done.
Okay.
I can't hear you.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, we got you.
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, we're good. Great, thank you. So during the presentation, you stated that we are not keeping pace with demand and we need to build 339 units per year. This is sort of a follow-up from Council Member Coach Moore's question, but do we even have the space right now in the zoning for us to be able to make or to meet that demand of 339 units per year?
That is an aspect of the land capacity study that's being done in parallel with this project, and they are assessing, they're comparing the capacity to those targets, and adjusting them if needed. That's putting the older targets. But I don't believe there's any challenges on the capacity side. I think it's more about the feasibility of development of housing within that capacity.
Thank you. And the other question that I had is, do you know whether or not our current infrastructure could sustain that amount of units per year? Because I know pre-COVID, our larger arterial streets were always busy during rush hour times.
I think it always depends on your standards in terms of level of service on things like roadways. But they did, and perhaps Brian could speak of this more than I. But I know as part of the urban growth capacity study, one of the key questions is an assessment by the jurisdiction of are there any infrastructure gaps or any barriers on the infrastructure side to having the growth, and are there any areas where the infrastructure could not support more growth? And they didn't find any significant areas, to my knowledge. Is that?
Yeah, if I could just add to that. So it's a great question, Councilmember Kraft. And for the numbers that we presented tonight, I don't know if we have an answer for you, but I know within the comprehensive plan currently that was updated a few years ago, the projected numbers that are in the comp plan are, I'm pretty sure, just slightly lower than what we presented tonight. And we do have to accommodate, or at least have a plan and financing measures in place to have the infrastructure match those future needs. So to a degree, we can meet additional growth. I don't know if it's to 2040, but I'm certain it's within the next decade that we would still have capacity to do that. It's just when we update it, we'll probably, with these numbers that we presented tonight, we'll have to answer your question and then make adjustments accordingly.
Okay, great. Thank you both.
Okay. Council President Honda.
We've talked about having folks who are not able to afford housing in Federal Way, to afford buying a home in Federal Way, which is what we would really like everyone who wants to be able to buy a home to be able to buy a home. What Federal Way needs to also work on is getting jobs, and jobs other than retail and fast food, and for folks to be able to do that, because we don't want people to buy a home in Federal Way and then leave Federal Way every day and go to work. We want them to stay in Federal Way and work. And so we have a really long road ahead of us, but I know we can do it. But that's a concern too. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? All right.
Mayor, if we could just get kind of a general sense that the 5 objectives that we presented tonight are in line with the desires of the council, and if there's any adjustments that need to be made, we're certainly happy to do that. But maybe just an indication that we're headed down the right path. That we don't want to go down a direction that you're not happy with. So if you could let us know this is just kind of a nodding of the heads or a thumbs up or whatever the case is, that would be helpful.
So, council, I guess let's put it this way. Is there anybody that has any objections to the overall plan that you could articulate? Or another direction you'd like to see us go? Okay. Would everybody essentially... Oh, Councilmember Kochmar.
You're muted.
Councilmember, you're muted.
Let's see. I owe Jim probably for his drink Coca-Cola fund. At any rate, I maybe zero in on what we should be focusing on. Let's say over the next 2 years, because you have a very broad perspective, but some of them aren't really feasible. For example, I mean, if we want to build duplexes and townhouses in the residential neighborhood, but there's no available lots or space, that might not be something to concentrate on as much as perhaps encouraging condos to be built in our downtown core, and then to be working with the mall on how to perhaps make that into a more of a break up the mall so it's not super blocks and have more of a residential and boutique type shopping experience. So I don't know what we should concentrate on over the next couple of years. Certainly allowing single family townhouses and duplexes in the single family residential, I think, is absolutely imperative. But that being said, do we then also need to look at annexing in areas east of the freeway so that we can expand the space available? So maybe just zeroing in on where we should, or narrowing it down, what we should be looking at. That's my only comment.
Sure, and that's very helpful feedback. I appreciate that. If I just to maybe address it really quick, I think a mixture is good. If I could submit that, to not necessarily concentrate on one or the other, because we do have subdivisions that are coming online every year, so things are getting built out there where things like duplexes and cottage housing and things like that can be built. There's also infill opportunities with duplexes and ADUs. If we were suddenly to change our code to do that, I think we'd see a lot of that. And then in addition to the higher density developments that we would see. To your point about the mall, I do believe within our comprehensive plan, it does talk exactly what you're saying, that the road network needs to be a little bit better and the super blocks need to be broken up. So I appreciate you saying that. And that's something that we are having ongoing discussions with the mall about to realize in the future. So I appreciate that feedback. I think we can incorporate what you just suggested within the objectives that we presented tonight. But if there's anything that you want to adjust, we can certainly do that.
That's fine. I'd be real curious to see what areas are available for infill or for townhouses or for redevelopment. I'm just curious. Yeah. But thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Cephedosa, I thought I saw your hand go back up. Did you, your hand was back up for a moment.
Can you hear me?
Did you? Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, it was. Okay, thank you so much.
Mayor, she just disconnected from the meeting. I'm going to work with Jerry Lynn, get her dialed in.
Okay, all right. Oh, here she is. Lydia, you're back.
I'm having issues,
okay.
So never mind. I'm okay.
All right, Jerry Lynn and Thomas are going to work with you. Thank you. Well, we'll get those all squared away before our regular meeting. Council, any other question?
Mayor, we can reach out to Councilmember Cephedosa to get her feedback offline. Okay.
All right. All right. Is there anything else we need? I know that I don't know if we hit the last slide, but is there any further, any more from either Kevin or Brian or Cheney?
I just want to thank the council for devoting a discussion on this issue. Really appreciate the time that you've allowed us to talk about this. So thank you.
Very good. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Kevin, for a great, thank you, Cheney. Great presentations. So I see that on the agenda, we had room for, we've already had council questions. There's public comment. Stephanie, is there anybody who's signed up to comment on this?
No, Mayor, I don't have anybody signed up for this meeting.
Okay. Does anybody have any other further comments on this matter before we adjourn to executive session? Okay, hearing none. Once again, thank you, Kevin, Cheney, Brian, council. Great job. All right, we will retire to executive session for collective bargaining pursuant to RCW 4230-1404B. The anticipated time of the executive session will be about 10 minutes. I would anticipate it would take just a few minutes because of the electronic, the digital stuff. It'll take us maybe 4 or 5 minutes before we all get online. But
Mayor, where's the link for the executive session? Do we just come back into this meeting?
No, Stephanie.
It's on the cheat sheet that was sent out.
Mayor,
I'll hook you up, Linda. Just a moment.
What's that, Thomas? You were going to say something?
Stephanie says that it is on. She's working on getting the exec session started. She says that it's on the sheet that she had sent out.
Okay.
It's on the agenda.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. We'll be in recess for that purpose.